Our next speaker is James Edward Gray II. He's like one of the people who I've looked up to in the Ruby community for a long time. I gotta say, I want to be like James when I grow up. He's one of my personal heroes, and I'm pretty anti-hero worship, but I got a hell of a lot of respect for James. James is a co-panelist on Ruby Rogues with me, and I've been doing that for over 2 years now. So for every week for 2 years, I've got to hang out with James for an hour or two, and I got to say that's one of the highlights of the last couple of years for me. So, James, thanks for being my friend, and thanks for coming and doing this talk for everyone and putting yourself out there. So, everybody, give a big hand for James Edward Gray II.
Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. When Josh asked me to come to GoGaRuCo, I hit him with this idea. I'm like, yeah, so I've had this talk I've been rolling around in the back of my head for a few years. I want to try out. And he's like, awesome, James has this great idea. And it's like, what do you want to talk about? And I'm like, my disability. And I'm pretty sure that's the last thing on earth he expected me to say. So we're all probably pretty nervous right now. You're nervous about whether or not this talk's going to be worth your time. I'm definitely trying something outside of my wheelhouse, but Josh is scared blind, okay? It's just, okay, here we go. I want to talk about what you're seeing right now, because it might not be exactly what you think it is. We're not far enough along in this talk to know what I'm going to do, right? But we're watching Jeg 2 on stage at GoGaRuCo, and according to the write-up of a conference I was at recently, whatever I do, it's going to be amazing. So don't worry. I'm not worried. But the truth is, you don't know what I'm going to do. Like, for example, maybe I just have a few more slides, and then I'm about to break out a keynote here and do some live coding in front of you. Throw some Ruby around. See what you think about that, right? That's one possibility. But only if you don't really know what's going on here. Actually, if you know what's going on, you know there's a 0% chance of me doing any live coding here right now. And the reason is that in this wheelchair right now, sitting at this table, I can't actually type. This presentation is designed so that I can run the entire thing with only touching the spacebar, which is about the limit of my mobility here right now. And it's a good thing the talk's only 30 minutes, because I can't keep it up for too terribly long. I'll get tired and cold the longer this goes. So eventually we'll reach my limit of what I'm capable of. So that's what you're actually seeing happening in front of you right now. Because I have a pretty public presence in the Ruby community, people ask me a lot of questions. And sometimes they're kind of funny. I used require CSV somewhere in my code, therefore complicated not CSV related question, right? Please help. I do answer every single email I get, I try. So if you love me, don't email me. Thanks. But as they get to know me, as they've spent a lot of time around me, I just had a wonderful thing in July where I spent 3 days sequestered in a house with the Ruby Rogues, which, if that sounds cool to you, it's way cooler than it sounds. It was great. But, we're all close friends, and we know each other well. And people have different questions when they know me that well, and different things they want to talk about. Or sometimes they'll find my wife and pull her aside and ask her questions. And what they want to know about is my disability, why I'm in a wheelchair. So let's talk about that. Let's answer some questions. I think a lot of people think that this is like personal or secret or something I would only want to say to a couple of people. I don't feel that way at all. If I came up to you and you had a bandage on your arm, it would be totally socially acceptable for me to ask what happened to your arm, right? And I feel the same way. You can come up and ask me anything you want to know, and I'll tell you. So don't ask about my sex life unless you really want to know. Sometimes if it seems difficult for me to answer a particular question or something, there can be two reasons for that. Sometimes they require a lot of context in order for you to actually understand what's going on. I would love to tell you up here today why at almost 40, the wait staff often still asks my wife what I would like for dinner. But it requires a ton of context to make sense, and that would be a 30-minute talk in and of itself. The other problem is some of the things you're about to see may be unusual to you, but they're my normal. This is just the way things are. I don't often stop and think about, why do I do this particular thing the way that I do it? And it's kind of hard to measure those things unless I actively try to do it and consider why it's different, right? But I want to do that now. I want to take you down the rabbit hole, try to answer a few questions, and then see what we can learn from that. So let's try. This will be the hardest question for me the whole time I'm here. It's incredibly complicated. I'm going to try to give you the simple version. Technically speaking, I have a muscular dystrophy. That's not really a disease. It's a family of 41, I think, neuromuscular diseases. More specifically, I have a spinal muscular atrophy. Also not a disease. It's a subcategory of muscular dystrophies. Very specifically, I have SMA type 1 or Werdnig-Hoffmann disease. It's named after the two German doctors that discovered it. But you'll find this is not a very good description of me. If you were to look on the Muscular Dystrophy Association's website, even just a few years back, you would find symptoms like the following listed for my disease. I know you can't judge this right now because I'm in a wheelchair, I have a bag supporting me, but I promise you I can sit unassisted. Difficulty swallowing, this one showed up for me in my late 20s, early 30s, which is significant when you combine it with this one. So you can see it's not a very good fit. And the reason for that is people with spinal muscular atrophies were missing a key protein called, very originally named, survival of motor neuron, SMN. We're missing that key protein of muscle development, but I have compensating genes that give me some extra protein, SMN2, which isn't a good replacement, but it does lessen some things. So I don't fit the mold very well. I have kind of an unusual variant of this disease. You probably don't know my particular disease very well, but there are other diseases in the same family that are more common. One is Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, which you may know. People with Duchenne's tend to progress normally until around 6 or 7 when they start to stumble and eventually need a wheelchair and progress on from there. Another more common is Lou Gehrig's or ALS, the same thing, which the most famous case probably to us is Dr. Stephen Hawking has Lou Gehrig's disease. That's an interesting comparison because Dr. Hawking also has an unusual variant of Lou Gehrig's disease that lessens the effects of it on him, just like my variant lessens the effects on me. So if you hit me in the knee with a hammer, it still hurts. I can feel my legs. Some people can't. Diseases like spinal bifida and stuff, they can't feel their legs. I can. However, you still won't get a reflex response from me. That's not because I don't have reflexes. It's because the diminished muscles in my legs have progressed to the point where there would be no measurable effect. Even though I have a reflex, it would try to trigger something, but nothing would happen worth watching. So basically, the short story of my disease is that I get weaker over time. That's a generalization, but roughly what happens. I think it's fine for us to tackle the hard questions. People want to know these things, so I'll give you the bad news. The answer is yes. Then I'm going to give you the really bad news. So are you. You probably think I cheated my way through that last one. Most people want to know this. So again, I'll give you the plain truth. I don't know. And I'll give you the painful truth. You don't know when you're going to die either. So that's the answer, right? I don't think about it any more than you do because it's not any more significant. Medically speaking, my disease attacks primarily my skeletal muscles. Those aren't the only kind of muscles in your body. You have other muscles like smooth muscles and stuff. My heart is fine and not affected. The biggest problem is my diaphragm, which is a skeletal muscle. So it's weakened. I get bronchitis and pneumonia and things like that more commonly than you do. It takes me longer to get over those things. But our medicine's kind of caught up with that. And I sleep on a machine called a BiPAP that breathes well for me all night long. So that makes a huge difference. And then even we have more invasive procedures for when I'm ill that help clear that out. So, whatever problems I'm going to have in the future, I figure medicine will be there by then, if it's not already. So I don't think about it any more than you do. So this potted plant and I have a lot in common right now. It's mainly mobility. When I choose to travel this far, I switch to this manual wheelchair, which is not my usual wheelchair. I spend my days in an electric wheelchair. And the electric is a very expensive and sensitive piece of equipment, the kind that you don't want thrown around in the baggage compartment of an airplane. It's expensive, right? So I don't bring that. Also, it severely complicates travel on the other side, right? Together we weigh about 400 pounds. So it's not the kind of thing you can just fold up and throw in a trunk like this manual that I have here. So it expands our transportation options. So when I choose to come to GoGaRuCo, I make a trade-off, right? We all understand trade-offs. So right now I've traded off my mobility for the ability to spend time with you, which is important to me, right? The main reason that I can't move is I have an arch enemy, and that's gravity. Gravity is my arch enemy. It has a much bigger effect on me than it does on you. It helps, demobilize me or pin me in place. So if I've ever had trouble shaking your hand, now you understand why, right? It's difficult for me to get my hand up to where your hand is, and that's gravity. The cool thing about an arch enemy is you can learn to count on them. So sometimes people see me do things and they ask if I'm spastic or if I've lost control. The answer is no, I have full control of my movements. It's that something's become pinned or I'm uncomfortable or something like that, and I'm using gravity to my effects, throwing myself to one side. In my electric, it's even better, right? Because I can move and then reverse the direction real quick to get the momentum, and that helps me free a limb or something like that, move something where I want it to be, so to speak. I also mentioned that I will have trouble regulating my temperature up here, and that's true. You have this layer directly under your skin of your muscles, and I have the same layer, but since mine is greatly diminished, your layer helps trap heat inside of you, kind of this furnace. And with mine being so much smaller, then I just bleed heat. I live in a very warm place, and I built this lovely porch on the front of my house, and I will go outside during the days and program and just warm myself in the sun like a lizard, right? And in the wintertime, I hole up in my office and point a space heater like directly at me and keep the room so warm that people don't like to go in it, which is effective. It's great. So when I come to other places, this is what I feel primarily. I went to England and Scotland earlier this year. Some of you may know that. That was really cold. I don't like that too much. As I get cold, I lose functionality. So certain things get harder for me as I get colder. if you go back and watch the video on Confreaks of the rogues doing the live panel at Lone Star, I was so cold that day I couldn't manipulate a slide clicker. So if you watch the video, Katrina is advancing the slides for me while I'm talking on stage. It was very cold in that room. I bet I can guess what you're thinking here. Isn't this kind of a solved problem? Can't you just layer up? Well, it looks like this to you, but it feels like this to me, okay? Those extra layers of clothing, they greatly restrict me, like on a very noticeable level. Increases gravity's hold on me. So if I can get by without it, I usually will. Sometimes I don't. When I was in England and Scotland, I promise I wore a sweater everywhere. But here, I can get by without it. I was wearing one this morning. I've taken it off now so that I can get this talk and stuff like that. So I've been talking about building blocks. These are the building blocks that make me who I am. You have different building blocks. They are different in you. But the end result is the same, at least enough that we all end up here in a city listening to speeches about Ruby for whatever reason. We have that in common. And I actually learn from all of you all the time. Every week on Ruby Rogues, I'm talking to one of you, usually, about something and learning how you do things the way you do and why. I think there may be some value in how I do some of these things that you might actually be able to glean. So I'm going to try and lay it out. Having muscular dystrophy does a ton of things to me, large and small, and these are some things I've chosen to talk about, but by no means an exhaustive list. So the first one is kind of a small thing, but as I have gotten weaker over time and as I battle with the cold, which affects me greatly, I'm slowing down quite a bit. And in the last 2 or 3 years or so, I think my typing speed's gone about in half, roughly. So I'm slowing down. So I'm kind of into automation, and most of you probably know that. I wrote the TextMate book because I had to understand TextMate at a very deep level to automate it. And now I've been moving on to Emacs because I find myself needing more automation, and turns out that's something Emacs excels at. You can automate it at any level you want. So the interesting thing, though, is in doing this, I have kind of an intimate understanding of workflows and things like that. I'm recently thinking about, I'm trying to stop thinking about things at a character level. Our text editors would like us to behave on a character-by-character basis, or consider things on a character-by-character basis. But if I have an automation that I trigger that creates a class for me in the correct space, intuitively knowing how I would do that, that saves me a lot more than just typing CLASS, right? So I'm thinking we need to think about these things at a higher level. Anyways, I think projects can benefit from this. We have this axiom in programming: you should make your change easy to make, then make the change. How about we make our projects easy to build, then build the project, right? And we see some of this with things like Qbot and stuff like that, but I think we could do more, and more specifically on certain projects. That's one thing. So don't be embarrassed if you've never heard of this. I'm disabled and I was in my 30s, so someone explained it to me. But if you have a disability where you have a fixed amount of energy to get through the day, we have to explain that in some way. And energy is an abstract concept that's difficult to understand. So a therapist trying to help you grasp this concept would likely hand you a handful of spoons, some fixed number, let's say 15 or something. And then they'll say, walk me through your day. And you say, well, I get out of bed, and they take away a spoon. I take a shower, and they take away a spoon, right? And this is it's a very concrete concept we can get very fast. There's a fixed number, and as you spend them, they're gone, and you have to choose where you spend them. This is a big thing for me as a programmer. I have this understanding of the economy of action, right? The things we do, they have costs, and I'm very aware of that. I have to approach everything from this standpoint of listen first. That's like the most important thing. I have to understand what we're talking about, what we're being asked to do, right? Then I have to think it through a little bit. That doesn't imply I don't make mistakes. Of course I make mistakes. I try to avoid the really, really boneheaded mistakes, right? The ones I could have thought my way around. And then finally, act. Less is more by far. If I can think of a smaller set of actions that does something and meets the same requirements, that's huge. And that applies in all of programming, right? Because the less code we have out there, the less we have to manage, maintain, etc. And upkeep, you have, most of you, a surplus of energy. So, once you're over a certain point, you don't have to measure every little bit of it. And so if you spend a little extra on some upkeep thing, you think, it's not affecting me that much, or it doesn't, it doesn't matter so much. But I know how soon upkeep kicks in and exactly how much it matters. Anything that removes one spoon from me forever greatly diminishes like everything about me, right? So that's incredibly significant. This is my lovely wife, Dana, who you see around all the time. She is the substituted thing, right? I made the trade-off to come here to GoGaRuCo. I gave away my mobility. Dana substitutes and fills that role for me while I'm here. She makes all of this possible, right? That I can come here and I can do these things and I can spend time with you. So I understand asking for help on a big level, right? This is, we all play this game, and some of you might be good at asking for help, but I'm playing it on a whole other level than you are. It's different when you realize, that, I'll spend too much energy doing this, so honey, would it be okay if you help me eat this time, right? So that I don't have to spend those particular spoons. It saves me a lot of energy, right? So this is a big thing. I want to take you back to this picture I chose for Hawking. This is the person who explained how black holes work to us, right? And look at how much help it took to put Hawking in microgravity. This is a specially chartered flight on a modified airplane with 2 technical specialists and understand how all this equipment works. That's Hawking's nurse in the background looking after his specific unique health needs. This is a hard thing to accomplish, right? And it totally makes sense for us to do this, right? Of all the people that should experience microgravity, surely Dr. Hawking is at about the top of the list. Just being in this environment may give him new ideas where he explains more about how the world works to us, right? That's really key. Help is important. I'm becoming less and less interested in what individual programmers can accomplish. Surely you've noticed that every stone we pick up, there's a giant Alice in Wonderland style rabbit hole underneath. You don't have time to go down all those rabbit holes. You can't do it, right? We're only interested in the things we can accomplish together. So this is about people. This is about interaction, right? Speaking of which, at work, we have a lot of rabbit holes. You could come help us. I work for From A to B, one of the sponsors of this conference, and we need more devs. So if you're looking for a job, come talk to us. So my advice to you is get social, right? You've seen people doing this here at the conference. Sam had that great talk about optimizing Ruby. Did you notice that optimizing Ruby wasn't so much a tools process, it was a people's process, right? I found these things, then I talked to the right people. How are we going to fix this? I asked for these APIs, and they gave me those, right? In Mike's talk just before this, no GoGaRu was a people process, not a code process, right? I saw recently an equating of soft talks and advanced talks at the conference. And the implication was that soft talks are not advanced talks. And for a while, I was trying to be generous in my interpretation of that and saying, phew, they're better at different things than I am. For me, the soft talks, that was the hard part. But now that I think about it, I'm changing my mind on that. They're just wrong. The learning how to program, that's the easy part. Learning how to be a programmer, that's the advanced stuff. Okay, that's what gets you to the next level. I think we should work on that. That's all I have. Thank you very much.